In this video, I'm going to show you how to remove and replace your rack and pinion on a Toyota Camry, located on top of the back of the engine cradle, connected to both front wheels. You're going to want to center the steering wheel, and you can do that by sitting in the driver's seat and turning that wheel until you back and forth make sure the wheels are firm, and center that steering wheel to your best ability. Now you're going to want to take your seat belt from the driver's seat. And I'm sure you've seen some tow truck drivers do this. You're going to want to run it right through. You might have to pull your seat up all the way, which is pretty easy. And then lock it in. Give it a firm pull. Now that's nice and centered. Disconnect the negative on the battery cable. If you have a factory terminal, it will look like this, and it'll be a 10mm wrench. I have an aftermarket universal, so 1/2 inch. Set it aside, make sure it doesn't pop up, and touch that battery. To remove the air box, we're going to undo 4 of these little butterfly clips, and you just simply pop the tops like that. So there's 2 by the fender and 2 on the inner engine side. That's right behind the starter. You can feel them and undo them. We're going to move our way over here, and the air temp sensor is right here. A little help of a screwdriver, never hurt. Set it aside, and then follow the air tube over to the throttle body, and right here is a vent tube. Going to get a pair of pliers. We're going to squeeze that clamp, and then just pull the tube right out. Leave the clamp on the air tube. Going to undo the clamp to the throttle body. Take it off the throttle body, just give it a wiggle, and lift it up, just like that. Now with the airbox cover out of the way, we can clearly see the steering column coming out, going into that power steering rack. And you see that blue factory line? Well, we're going to mimic that. First, I'm going to just take some parts cleaner, and I'm going to clean the area so I can wipe it down and make sure I make good contact with the paint. This is a crucial point of lining up that rack and steering wheel. Make sure it stays as straight as possible, so the alignment will be so much easier to do. Make sure that's nice and dry. Now we're going to take a paint pen. You can use anything that's going to make a nice line. I also like to use fingernail polish, believe it or not. Like a nice color, bright color, whether it be white or neon color. And I actually have a paint pen here. While that dries, I'm going to take a 12mm socket or wrench. I'm going to use a socket and take that pinch bolt right out so we can really access and get this. And there's our pinch bolt for that. Set it aside. So now I'm going to break both power steering lines going into the rack. I'm going to break them free. So 17mm wrench. If you have a crow's foot, that might help you too, or a tubing wrench, which is 17mm. But we're going to get this on there and hope for the best. I like an extended bar for leverage here. I'm going to put on this wrench. See if I can break it free. Oh, I got some movement. Let's see what we got. All right, see how the line is spinning with that? Well, the good news is we can get some penetrating spray and maybe break that in there. But we did break it free from the rack. Let's do the same on this back one if we can even get in there. Probably not, so now I'm going to get some penetrating spray and soak that down. So I soaked that line down, and while it was working its way in there, I took a pry bar or a rod, and I leveled it on that line like this. So you can see how it's like holding it, and then I took my wrench and I broke that free, just by spinning it small, quick back and forth turns, and I worked that penetrating spray right in there, and it broke free from the line. So strongly recommend that. I'm just going to take a 17mm wrench and keep working that back and forth until the line comes out. Don't forget to put a catch basin underneath to grab this power steering fluid that's going to come out. And you have to take this line out first before you can get to that back line. I've only got like one turn left on this line, and you can see the power steering fluid starting to come out. Nice, that's right out of the way. Now we're going to break that other line free. That is a 17mm wrench also. So now we have the return line. We successfully got the pressure line out, and that's the one that's sticking out of the rack. And the return line, unfortunately, is frozen in the nut. So the line is just twisting. We're going to end up breaking it. So I'm already have a return line ordered. And I recommend you do the same if this starts happening to you. I mean, with age, it's going to happen. Good, it broke off. So now with that line broke off, I don't have to worry about taking that fitting out. So we can move on to raising the vehicle. Now you're going to want to raise and support your vehicle, and you're going to want to take both front tires off. 21mm socket. So once your vehicle's raised up, you're going to repeat the procedure on both sides. So I like to take the jam nut and loosen that up so that I can take that outer tire end off easily once I've disconnected it. This is a 22mm wrench. I don't know if you'll have the same size jam nut. That's all you want to do is break it free and count how many turns you do, whether it's a half a turn or a full turn. Now we're going to take the cotter pin out, grab your cutters, take that old cotter pin out, or new, and throw it away. You're not going to reuse it. With an 18mm socket or wrench, we want to break the castle nut off the outer tire end. I like to leave it on there just a little bit. Now we want to tap right here on that knuckle. Put the castle nut back on, that way we don't lose it. And now we'll count the turns of that tie rod end. So down at 6 o'clock, 3, 7, 9, 11, so 14 1/4, and just write that down, record it. So we're on the passenger side now, and I can tell you the jam nut for the factory style tie rod end is 19mm. Just break that free. Now we can take the castle nut out. The castle nut on the passenger side, which looks like an OE style, is a 17mm socket. And as you can see, if you have a cotter pin, take it out before the castle nut. Ours was missing. Oh, look at that, it's broken off inside. So if you have something like that, you're going to want to drill that or punch it out before you reinstall it. Let's count our turns. 6 o'clock. 3, 5, 10, 14, 15 and an eighth. Make sure you write that down. So now it's time to take that steering column off the top of that power steering rack. So we're going to take a little pry bar, give it a couple of taps, see if it slides up enough. Well, it looks like we got quite a bit more to go. Well, we know it's nice and free now, so now we're going to remove the rack and see if we can easily manipulate that without doing any more pushing up on that steering column. You're going to have to unmount the sway bar from the cradle, and there are 4 bolts, 2 on this side and 2 on the other, holding that bracket bushing down. They're a 12mm socket or wrench. We're going to break this back one free. It looks like that's going to be a slow turning process. And then the front, the same, 12mm. Let's break it free. All right, now I'm going to get a ratchet wrench. The reason you have to take the sway bar out is because it is located directly in front of the rack and pinion bolt that holds it to the cradle. So you won't be able to pull that bolt out. Let's see if we can get to that back one. Okay. You might not get your ratchet wrench off either, unfortunately. I will go to the front one. Here's the front one. Now let's see if we can get our ratchet wrench out. Let's get a screwdriver, a pry bar. Let's take that bracket right out. And this is probably a good time to change that bushing if needed. So now we're on the passenger side, and here's the location to that sway bar bracket. Same bolts as the other side, 12mm head. Let's break them free. And there we go. Now we can use our ratchet wrenches. All right, so I'm on my last bolt coming out. This is that difficult one because it's located right next to the floorboard. We have to take the bolt all the way out in order to get our wrench out too. There we go. We already took the front out, set these aside. Like I said, take the bracket off with the bushing and replace that bushing if needed. So now we're on the passenger side still, and I'm going to disconnect that return line to the steel line that goes in the rack. So this is the hose right here that goes to the reservoir for the power steering. I do have a special tool for this. So it just basically goes, it's like a fuel line separator. There we go. It's going to make a mess, like I said. There we go. And like I said, just make sure you have that pan right below there. Now, if you look further up, you'll see a bracket right here. We're going to have to undo that bracket. So it's a little nut on top of that welded bolt. I'm going to spray it now because I can tell it's not going to be pretty. Okay, so it is a 12mm wrench or socket. Mine's just so corroded, so I'm going to have to use what we call twisty sockets. Get that on there. See if we can break that free. I do believe this bracket's going to hold both lines, the return and the pressure line, which we've already disconnected from the rack, so this will get them out of the way so you can unbolt that bracket. So you just take that bracket, lift it up. Now we're free from the rack. So during this procedure, you're going to have to take the cradle and lower it. So we're going to put a pole jack in the center, but we have to access this bolt and let this come down. So underneath this fender liner is 2 bolts that mount that bracket, 10mm socket. It's just a little like support bracket right here. And we can see one's already broken, so I'm going to take that one off. And I'm going to do the same procedure on the other side, and then we'll lower this cradle bolt once we put the pole jack in. And then we can easily access the rack and pinion bolts. So now we're on the driver's side, and it's a 14mm socket. Now we'll do the passenger side. Let's get that pole jack. So I've put my pole jack right in the center of this cradle, so that way I can take the 2 cradle bolts out and lower it down enough to get access to the rack bolt. So a 19mm socket. Let's take the cradle bolt out. Do both sides. Now we're just going to back off on the pole jack a little bit, and we can see that cradle coming down already. It's still going to support it. And then you want to slowly pay attention to that steering column knuckle. It's going to slowly pull itself up also. So I just took a pry bar and just basically manipulate the links, and then I pried that up. So now the sway bar is completely out of the way, and I can get a swivel socket on there. I'm going to put a 19mm wrench on the back side of that bolt. That up there. Let's see if we can spread it out. Here we go. There's the nut from the other side. It does have a stopper on it, but mine was spinning. I have a 19mm wrench on the nut for the lock for the bolt. Okay. Now we'll get a pry bar and see if we can slide those bolts out. There's one. So now we're going to continue in taking that steering column off that rack with a pry bar, tapping it up. And there we go, nice and free. So I'm going to take my pry bar again, get this sway bar down, and the lines are all nice and loose and they're unbolted. Take this pry bar and just let's pull this rack right out of the mounting ears. And it's going to come out through the actual driver's side firewall. You're going to just have to twist where the gear goes, and you'll see it from the other side. All right, so we'll go out in the fender well. So now we can take the lines down out of the way, and we're going to, like I said, put this right through the driver's fender well and lift it up. You're going to have to just turn it so that that gear fits through the hole. So once we get to a certain point, we're going to turn it this way, see if we can get it around this vent tube. There we go. And it's going to come, like I said, right out here. So once the old rack is out, you want to put the new rack right beside it. And make sure, if you have a long screwdriver, you can put it right through so the bushings line up. And that way you know you're in the same spot. Let's take our blue protective cap off. That's just for shipping. And we'll see where we're located. Now I can tell you from looking at this with my naked eye, it does need to turn this way. And if I go by that dot, then it only needs to go a little bit, but that's not how you're going to do this. We're going to judge the dot and the paint mark. We're going to put a pair of pliers on this and see how many turns it takes, and then bring it back and then get it back to the center. And then you're going to have to do the same for this one because you want it to be as close as possible, and you can never eyeball that. So I'm going to take a pair of locking pliers. I'm going to put it up on the top here. So on the dirty one you can't really see it, but the neural marks, you don't want to mark that up. So I'm just going to loosely lock this on. Just going to snug it up. Okay. So we want to count the turns. So I have my blue mark. It's marked on the boot. I'm going to hold the boot with my hand, make sure it doesn't turn with it. Let's see if we can count the turns. Like I said, fluid will come out. There's 1. One and a half. Let's see if it's on the other side. Yep, line up right on the other. So 1.5 turns. So let's turn it 1.5 the other way, and we'll find the neutral spot. There's our half. There's 1, so that should be center. Let's confirm that. 1. Should be a half turn. Yep, there's a half. Okay, so now we know we can bring it back half turn, and 1 is true center. So now we know we're correct on that. So let's go ahead and try it on this one. So we know 1.5 turns is 1 full rotation to the left, and 1.5 turns is 1 full rotation to the right. So I'm going to mark the new one. All right, so we have our paint mark. I'm going to hold that boot from spinning, and I'm right here aimed at myself, so I know that I'm going to turn it and count the turns. There's 1.5. So we're going to go half and 1 back, and now we're going to go the other way. 1.5. So let's do the half, then 1, and that's right in the center. So if we want to do it that way, we can take this and line it up again. Check our tie rod ends, and they are pretty much the same. So that's good. New rack comes with jam nuts, so we don't have to worry about that. So we're ready to install. Always leave the covers in because you don't want any dirt getting in there on insulation. And now we can reverse procedure. We're just going to put the rack right through the driver's fender well again. Just be mindful and try to clear everything you can. Remember, it's going to go on its side to get the steering gear through. And you'll probably have to go to the other side and clear it on some few things. All right. So from underneath now, I can stand it upright. Make sure the lines are out of the way. Pretty close right there. Get this one in. So we have the driver's side all lined up in the bracket, And the passenger side is kind of a free-floating clamp, so they don't know where to put it on in the factory, but it will move. So in order to get that to move easier, I'm going to put my bolt through now, put it right through the mounting part on the driver's side. Might just have to manipulate it a little bit. So I just grabbed my awl and I gave it a little twist. I need that bracket to line up like that. There we go. All right, there's the driver's side in. So now if we go over to the passenger side, let's get this sway bar out of the way. We can see that this bracket isn't pushed down far enough or twisted. So we're going to take our awl and do that. See if we can tap it down a little bit. So just make sure you get the lines guided correctly. I just had mine hung up a little bit, and that was one of the reasons I couldn't make my bracket line up over here, because I couldn't get it to slide. And now it fell into place, and I just need to just give it a couple of taps down so the bolt will go in. There we go. There we go. I think it was just stuck from the paint. I confirmed, I looked at the old one, yeah, it moves nice and freely. So. Let's get the awl. See if I can center that bolt. There we go. Oh, let's get the bolt. Let's put the nuts on both sides and the back. So we'll put the nut on the driver's side. There we go. Let's spin that down. And then I'm going to put it on the passenger side, same way. I backed the bolt out a little bit so I have a little bit more room. And that seems to be all I needed, because now I can easily start it. So I'm going to take my 19mm socket and gun and snug it up. Now let's do the same to the driver's side, then we'll torque it before we do anything else. All right, so a 19mm socket on this side and a 19mm wrench on the other. And the torque for the two gear assembly mounts to the cradle is 134 foot-pounds. There's one. Now we'll go over to this side. So now before I put the cradle up, I'm going to do as much as I can to give myself as much room. So I'm going to put this power steering bracket line holder back on, nice out in the open. Now I can grab the nut and put it right on that. So I did get a new nut that wasn't rounded off, and it's, if you need to know, it is 8 by 125, so it's 8mm by 125 pitch. If you need a new nut like I did, get that on there. And I lucked out because it's actually a 12mm wrench, just like the factory. And that's just a bracket, so you're just going to snug that up. Perfect. Now let's put that return hose back on. Put a little spray on that, see if I can get it to slide easier. Bring it right up to that stop. Get the pliers. Always try to line that clamp up just the way it was before, because it's got a history with the hose. It has memory. Believe it or not, I see them leak if they don't go back in the same spot. There you go. Okay. Now I'm going to slide my sway bar back in place. A lot easier to get to that back bolt right now. All right, so we're going to put the bushing back on. Slide that around the bar. Line it up to where it belongs. We'll get the bracket. Slide it over. Take our bolts. Start them by hand. Go into the driver's side before I tighten anything. All right, so we'll put the bushing on first. We're in the driver's side fender well. Bring that bushing in. Put the bracket on. Snap that down. Now you might have to pull the bar forward a little bit, like that, to line the holes up. It's going to be so much easier tightening the back ones with the cradle dropped like this. Always start them by hand. Okay, let's get a 12mm socket and ratchet and start them. Oh, much better than that wrench. I'm going to go back to the back. I'm going to snug these up and then we'll torque them to the manufacturer specs. Don't forget to snug down the passenger side too equally and then torque it. I go back and forth. You want to go left to right from the front bolt to the back bolt at equal turns because you don't want that bracket to get angled or jammed up. All right, let's get our torque wrench. So the torque is 14 foot-pounds or like 19 Newton meters. Let's see if we can get our torque wrench in there. They're only a 6mm bolt. Actually, I take it back. It's an 8mm bolt, so you don't need to torque it down too much. Okay, now we can go do the passenger side. Okay, so now before I put the cradle back up, I'm going to take my steering column and at least guide it on. Now, I don't want it really to touch any of the knurls parts because I want to line my blue mark up with my blue mark. But at least it's guided on there. And now I can take my pole jack and slowly spin it upward. So as I guide the pole jack up, I can actually see my steering column, and I'm going to go to there and then take my time and see if I can slide the joint over the steering gear. I might get a mirror so I can see real easy to see if I'm lining up the blue mark. Oh, looks pretty good actually. Blue mark's lining up pretty good. There we go. Let's take a good look at that again. See with the blue mark? Look at that. I'm one tooth off, I can see I am. So I'm going to pull it back out and rotate it. All right, let's continue to jack this up. I'm just going to keep going back and forth because you don't want that gear to jam, which can happen. And you'd have to lower the whole cradle again. Okay, now let's get our bolts. I'm just going to always start everything by hand. Make sure that that's started there. I'll get my mounting nut for that and bolt. There we go. Let's get the bolt started. Let's do the passenger side. Okay, let's get our gun, tighten this up. 19 millimeter. Go to the other side. Now we can remove the pole jack. Now we're going to tighten the nut and the bolt. 14 millimeter socket. We're going to do the same to the other side. Now we'll get our torque wrench. The two little cap bolts and nut on the end here, 14 millimeter socket at 20 foot-pounds. Same on the passenger side. Now we're going to put our little fender liner mounting bolt on. That's a 10 millimeter socket. Do the same to the other side. So before we install our outer tie rod ends, I like to take a copper or a silver never seize and spray the threads. That way, easier to do the alignment in the future. Nice clean movement. So this was the driver's side, that was 14 1/4. So we start at 6 o'clock. So there's 1, 5, 10, 'So the half of the quarter, let's see where it lines up. Sometimes your tie rod ends are going to be longer. So let's go with that. Drop it right in that knuckle. Hand start our castle nut. Snug it up. And we'll torque that. This is an 18 millimeter socket and the torque is 36 foot-pounds. Let's see if it lines up with the actual. It's okay to go just a hair more to line up the castle nut with the cutout hole for the cotter pin. Hair more. All right, now we're going to put a new cotter pin in. Feed the cotter pin through. I like to pull one arm down, and I'll cut the other one short, tap it up. No sharp edges. Now we need to tighten up our jam nut. The jam nut on this new rack is a 22 millimeter, so we're going to take it, bottom it out, and then you want to give it a good, quick tug. You want to make sure that's tight before you go down the road, because that could fall out or strip out. So now we're putting the passenger side outer tie rod end. We're going to do the same. Spray it with a never seize, whether it's silver or copper. And And this was 15 1/8. That's starting at 6 o'clock. So let's see if we can. Okay, so there we go. 1, 2, 10, 14, 15. Let's see where it lines up. Perfect. Sometimes you have to compensate just in case you're off just a hair on that. You want that wheel to stay straight. Let's install the castle nut. Now this was the one with the broken cotter pin. I did punch it out, drilled it out, so we can reinstall a new one. Let's get our wrench and torque that down. Torque specs is 36 foot-pounds. See where, oh, look at that, we lucked out. Our cotter pin hole lines right up. Well, we'll get a new cotter pin and put it through. Now let's tighten that jam nut. I'm going to bottom it out, 22mm wrench, and once it's bottomed, give it a good snug. Now we can put our tires on, both sides. Start the lug nuts by hand. That's a 21mm socket, and we'll snug them up in a crisscross pattern. Then we'll torque them to factory spec. .21mm socket, and the wheel torque is 76 foot-pounds. In a crisscross pattern. Double check. Before I put the lines in, I'm going to put the bolt in the steering column knuckle that goes down on the rack. Make sure you're down all the way on that groove. There's a cutout groove for this bolt to slide through. If you can't physically see it, you can feel it when the bolt won't go all the way through. So don't hesitate to grab like a little hammer and give it a tap down a little bit, being careful of the joint. There we go. Now with the 12mm socket, we're going to start it by hand. There we go. Once it bottoms out, I will torque it to factory specs because this is really important. We don't want that to strip or to fall out. I'll get the factory specs and torque it. So with a 12mm socket and extension, I'm going to torque this to factory specs 26 foot-pounds. So when installing the lines on the rack, you need to do the reverse procedure. So you're going to put the return line on first because it came off last. So we have to put that on. Start it by hand. And that's a 17mm wrench. You can't get to it with the pressure line on. By leaving the cap on until I'm ready to install the line, it eliminates any possible dirt getting in there. Now, hydraulic lines all depends on where it goes to. Most of them have a minimal of torque. So being that it's an aluminum housing and a pipe fitting thread, You never want to what we call reef on it, or really tighten it, over tighten. So 15 psi, that's usually about the norm, so 15 foot-pounds, which you can tell is usually when it bottoms out, and just a nice quarter or eighth turn should be about equal anywhere in there. You just want to make sure it's seated, but not over-tightened. So now we can install the pressure side of the line or the rack. Take that cover off. Some of that oil is going to come out. That's just packing oil. That's normal power steering fluid. And we're just going to bring that line up in and drop it in. Don't forget to put your new O-ring on. Now see how this line is twisted? We need to get that so it goes straight into the rack. So once you have your power steering pressure line lined up, take your 17mm wrench and start it slowly, confirming that it's going in straight, not cross-threading. It's kind of a difficult angle or place to get to, actually. So it's a little finesse. There we go. Had a little burr on it, so I couldn't get quite started. And like the return line, we're going to do the same. Tighten it till it bottoms out. And then give it a good quarter turn at the end. Okay, we're reaching the end of the line here, so see if I can get a good quarter turn out of it. There we go. So now we can reinstall the air box. Put the throttle body hose on first. Make sure you take that clamp, spin it so that it's easy access. And the air box cover. Make sure the clamps are out of the way, all four of them. It basically just snaps right down in place. To install the half-moon spring clamps, you just push in the center, like that. Making sure the cover's down firmly. Grab the last two, do the same. Make sure your throttle body hose is all the way on. 10mm socket or wrench. So we're going to hook up the air temp sensor connector. The clip part is on the top. You're going to slide that in. We'll lock down. Then we can put our vent hose on. Grabbing a pair of pliers. I'm going to squeeze down on that clamp and take that hose, line it up. Make sure it goes all the way down in, then release the clamp. Now you're going to take the negative cable, put it back on the post. I like to wiggle it down, make sure that that post stands above the terminal. That's a big problem that some people don't realize. Mine's a 12mm because it's already been replaced aftermarket. Factory should be a 10mm wrench or socket. The key also is to hold the terminal end, pull up on it while you push down so you don't bend that lead post. Make sure it's nice and snug. So now it's safe and time to take our seatbelt out of our steering wheel. Retract that back. And we can go add fluid. So when it comes to power steering fluid, you always want to check your manual and see what kind of fluid the manufacturer recommends. I can tell you that this particular car, ATF, any automatic training fluid, is perfectly fine, and I always use a synthetic blend or full synthetic. So we're going to top it off, fill that reservoir. We're going to fill those lines back up. It's okay if you go over the full line because you're going to have to burp the system out. And the one thing about power steering fluid, always put the cover back on. It's like brake fluid. The pump, when you turn the wheel, could shoot some fluid up. So now the proper way to bleed this would be with the key off. You could turn the key in the on position, but don't run it. And you're going to turn your wheel slowly all the way to the right and all the way to the left, back and forth, anywhere from 10 to 20 times. Then you'll come out and recheck your fluid and top off necessary. Once you've done that, you can start it up and check for leaks. After finishing this installation, it's important to have an alignment done on your vehicle. When only the best will do, demand TRQ, the only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.